The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
Episode 611, give or take, of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Welcome back. My name is Jason Bryant, your humble host, as today our guest is David Kjeldgaard, the winningest wrestler in, air quotes, Fargo history, as Dave is the only wrestler in American history to win 8 championships at the Cadet and Junior Nationals and place 11 times. So we will get into his backstory. He's an Iowa native, wrestled at the University of Oklahoma, currently residing down in Texas. We'll talk to him at length about his career and some of the highs and lows with it, because he had the highs of high school and the lows of college, and now the highs again of life outside of wrestling, somewhat in the business world. Before we get to that interview, a couple things in regards to the Matt Talk Podcast Network and some housekeeping. Fargo, yes, you know how much I love the tournament, you know how much I love the town, you know how much I love a couple of establishments in said place. I've been going to that tournament. This would have been my 22nd straight year. Now, I am still counting 22 years because 3 weeks ago, my nephew Jackson got married in Fargo. Now, that state hasn't shut down, but of course there is the masks and some social distancing. It was a socially distanced wedding at a beautiful church in the south side of Fargo. I really haven't gotten to that part of town because, I basically go to the Dome, a couple spots there on, the old Bucks and a couple breweries in town, but I really didn't get that far down. So, good place to see some different parts of Fargo that I didn't normally see. Beautiful church, by the way, but, congratulations to Jackson and Maddie on their recent nuptials. So, yes, I went to Fargo and actually had dinner at Herd and Horns, which is owned by football players and wrestlers at North Dakota State, or alumni of such, a wrestling-friendly place, a place that I've done this show recorded live from last year, and have been frequenting that place, along with, of course, the Bison Turf and the Buffalo Wild Wings. But the Fargo Almanac is the digital publication that I produce that has every single All-American in the history of the tournament, dating back to 1971. I started researching who the place winners were probably 10 years ago. And with help of USA Wrestling, Gary Abbott's actually his old office at USA Wrestling, he had binders of press releases that, before the Matt.com existed, just each year had its own printed copy of a press release. So between Mike Chapman's Encyclopedia of American Wrestling, which has been long since, pulled out of libraries and such, I do have a copy. I started there, made the corrections, went through using amateur wrestling news, using internet searches, using Gary's old archives of press releases and such. I pieced together every All-American. And then, of course, when we get to the internet age, those results are, they're not readily found between 1995 and when Track Wrestling picked up things. I know the Wrestling Report had a really good listing of those finals from those years. Matter of fact, some of those years I was actually sending those results to the Wrestling Report in terms of doing some freelance work for Team Pennsylvania after all the Virginia guys were eliminated. But the Almanac answers so many questions. In that book, which I'm selling at fargoalmanac.com for $20, or if you're a member, a patron of the Matt Talk Podcast Network at matttalkonline.com/join the team, and you hit that Patreon link and you are a patron at least the $10 a month or more, you get that as part of your team membership. And of course that involves a t-shirt, draft glass, that type of stuff. So it's a perk. And if you buy it for $20, you get updates for life. I'm not going to charge you $20 per year just to get the results off Flow Arena or previously off Track Wrestling. I'm not going to do that. You're going to buy it once. You're going to get free digital updates for life. It is a digital almanac. So I know some of you out there are thinking it's a printed version. Now, if you want a printed version, that's kind of on you, because you can take it to FedEx office or the UPS store and print a version out. I highly recommend you get it coil bound and front and back in black and white. It's going to probably cost you about $20 to print. So just the print costs alone make it really kind of cost prohibitive for me to sell I mean, you're not going to buy a book you need to update every single year for $40. I know that. So you're going to get it for $20, one-time purchase, free updates for life. So you got that. Or if you're a team member, you get that. You know, that's one of the perks, a t-shirt, a draft glass, the Division I preview guide. You get advanced episodes of this show and some other shows that are unreleased from the Matt Talk Podcast Network. Like example, if you are a patron of this show, you have already heard this interview. You've already heard Dave Kjeldgaard talk about what's going on. So who's the latest team member, you ask? Well, one of the perks is a shout out here on the show. Kurt Jones, back in old Central Region era of Virginia. Yep, old Virginia guy. He remembers Matt Talk in its previous iteration. Oh, the days of the forum. And anyway, Kurt Jones, we go way back. Appreciate the support, man. Appreciate the support. Now, more about the team membership. You go through Patreon, that's where you get the perks. That's where I can track everything, make sure you're getting everything. I can mail it out. Got some shirts to mail out. So those of you out there patiently waiting, the draft glasses, guess what? I'm out. I need to get more. So hang tight on those perks. And just so you know, if you're a new patron, it's going to be a couple months before you get it out. So I don't really send them out as soon as you register. It's usually 3 to 4 months afterwards, once you've been part of the network and basically gotten some value out of your team membership. Patreon.com/MattTalkOnline, MattTalkOnline.com/contribute. I'm going to go off script here just for a moment and talk a little bit about the women's wrestling movement that's going on. Julia Salata and some others there in the women's wrestling world have started this thing called How She Wrestles, hashtag How She Wrestles, and at How She Wrestles on Instagram and Twitter. Some of this is most of it is basically in direct response to Flow Wrestling not having a women's bout on the card and some of the detractors that are out there about women's wrestling. One of the most common complaints I hear or detractions I hear about women's wrestling from people is, well, it's just not good wrestling. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. If you've said that, have you gone to a local high school wrestling match at any point in your career life willingly as a fan? If you have, you are watching bad wrestling. You are not going, unless you go to Blair Academy and watch specifically Blair Academy, St. Edward, and Wyoming Seminary, for example, or Lake Highland Prep, or, if you live in the Lehigh Valley and only go to the top couple of teams, you're watching bad wrestling, because even on these power teams, you get bad matchups, you get bad wrestling. So don't spare me the whole snobbery about wanting to watch only the best. If you were only watching the best wrestling, you were only watching like maybe one event, 2 events a year. Point is, it's a fallacy of an argument. Now, to get back to the point, I'm going to play one of these How She Wrestles stories. These women are telling various stories on how she wrestles with, aggression, how she wrestles with the process. There's several of them out there right now. We've seen Helen Maroulis. We've seen Catherine Schei. We've seen the one I'm about to play for you is Jackie Davis. She's the former women's coach at Beat the Streets, New York. Now she's up in New England. And these stories are important because I've got 2 daughters. Whether or not they wrestle or not, that's on them. I really have no preference. The fact is, the quote by Terry Steiner talking about wrestling is so great and all the values it teaches, why keep that from our daughters? Well, yeah. And it's still an uphill battle for women who are trying to just come out there and enjoy the sport that men have enjoyed since the turn of the century. College wrestling teams have been around since 1900s. Women's college wrestling teams have been around since 1999, maybe 98. Minnesota Morris had a team, I think, in 1998. Missouri Valley started around 1999. We are talking less than 20 years. So think about that. Think about that. Now, here's Jackie Davis from the How She Wrestles campaign. Follow them at How She Wrestles, hashtag How She Wrestles, and we'll be back after the swoosh with David Kjeldgaard on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, because remember, you've always got time for short time.
Hi, I'm Jackie Davis, and this is how she wrestles with credibility. If you're going to be here, you better be here for the right reasons. This room doesn't need any distractions. This is not the place that you look for a boyfriend. I don't know if my coaches had these conversations with me because they had a previous bad experience or because they carried this stereotype of girls in sport within them. What I do know is that these are one of the conversations that really shaped my reality moving forward. This conversation is what made me realize I inherited not only the responsibility of earning credibility, but the responsibility of maintaining credibility, not just for me, but for every woman that walked before me, side by side with me, and after me into this space. This was a lot to handle as a teenager, so I got to work in the only way I knew how, and that was by overcompensating in every single thing that I did. I needed to show legitimacy in my existence, and I needed to show why girls and women should be welcome in this space. But at the same time that I was doing this and being shown that I was a monolith for all girls in this sport, I was being told that I was special and different than other girls. My teenage brain got all sorts of confused. I started living a very contradictory life. A life where I told myself I was showing up every single day to fight for equity. But then at the same time, a new girl would show up and I became the person policing the space. I said, you better be here for the right reasons. This isn't a joke. Don't make us look bad. Rather than welcoming this girl and making her life easier, I unloaded the same burdens that I had inherited. I fed into a cycle of oppression. Throughout the years, this concept of credibility, of earning it, of maintaining it, even with trusting other people with it, has morphed itself into every phase of my athletic and professional careers. I saw it when I was skeptical of joining a women's team in college. I see it now when I show up over-prepared and overcompensating for something as small as a staff meeting to as large as an international trip. And as much as I hate it, I still feel it when a woman comes into a space I'm working in and I feel threatened for no reason at all. I think practice makes permanent, and unfortunately, I feel like I was taught to feel like an imposter and to look at other women as competitors instead of allies. Each day, I work to unlearn this mentality and this behavior because ultimately, I want to work side by side with other amazing women to hand a more loving, equitable, and fierce future for the next generation of girls and boys. My name's Jackie Davis, and this is how I wrestle with credibility.
Well, there's no Fargo this year, so the best we can do is talk about the legends of USA Wrestling's past today. Dave Kjeldgaard coming on the program. The unique distinction, Dave, of having 8 Cadet and Junior national titles and 11 placements. You're the only one in American wrestling history to do that. We'll talk a little bit about that and what you're doing now. But first of all, it's been a while since we've seen each other. Welcome to the program, and going to be good to catch up.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to look back at Fargo and just summer wrestling in general. A lot of really good memories, a lot of good friends made. So look forward to discussing it.
Wrestling was kind of a family thing for you. Explain how you got into the sport.
Yeah. Wow. So I have 2 older brothers that wrestled. They wrestled in Northern Iowa. Both of them did. And my dad actually wrestled through high school and for a couple of years at University of Nebraska at Omaha. So I was the third boy in the family. And so getting into wrestling was more about going to practice because the family was going to practice. And I was probably the kid in diapers running around. And when I was ready to be out of diapers, I probably just started wrestling. So it was all a blend. There are some pictures of me pretty young, like 2 or 3 years old, with a singlet on in some tournament, doing some exhibition match. But so I started pretty young.
What was the thing that kind of kept you involved in it and drew you to it? Because sometimes you're just like, hey, I get dragged to practice. I don't necessarily want to keep doing this, but you kept doing it and you found a level of success. When did you start really seeing that level of success once you realized, I kind of like this thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually had a conversation around this the other day, And it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly something that stood out to me. I would say as I think back, the fact that it was unique and that there weren't. I grew up in Iowa, so a lot of people did wrestle at some level at some point in time, but I did feel like it was different than other sports. I played football through high school, played soccer all growing up, played baseball. I kind of did all the sports, but there was some uniqueness about a one-on-one competition where you're physically trying to control somebody else. There's nothing else like that. And while I enjoyed other sports, they almost were they were really fun to me, but I almost viewed them as different in the sense of like, hey, it was great, it's fun, it's a team sport, but this is where it really is for me. And again, very personal opinion. There's a lot of great things about other sports, but the physical nature, the one-on-one nature, there was something that was different, and I almost took it a little bit more seriously, and not intentionally. I think it was because I knew that it felt like there's a little bit more on the line when you step onto a wrestling mat than when I stepped onto other sports fields.
Now, you've mentioned your two older brothers, Doug and Dan, of course, competing at Northern Iowa, had a level of success themselves. What was it like coming, I don't want to say coming out of their shadow, but kind of overtaking them in terms of, credentials and things of that nature when you were younger?
It really wasn't much of a factor or an issue. We were a little bit removed, so 4 years older and 7 years older. And so they were, my biggest fans, biggest supporter, just as I was, looked up to them and always viewed them as my big brothers that I looked up to. So I don't think that was ever an issue that I thought about. It was just more about, we were all given certain sets of skills, and we need to be faithful with whatever we have and do the best we can. And that was the simple approach that I took.
There's a lot of wrestling history in that part of the state. Obviously, Council Bluffs and Omaha right there sitting across the river from one another. What was it like growing up wrestling in that area, the type of competition you'd see week in and week out when you were on the mat?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is it's easy now to have perspective and look at that. I don't know that I really fully appreciated the difference. Now, I knew I had one of the best coaches in Keith Massey, who, from the time even before I was in high school, was coaching me. I had brothers and a dad. Mark Schwab was one of my coaches in high school. So I think I tried to understand and appreciate what I have, but looking back, I don't know if I fully appreciated the level of competition that was right there. I live in Dallas, Texas now, and while there are some excellent individuals, I don't think there's clearly not the depth, even though the number of people, the population itself is through the roof. But looking back, all of the competitors, my teammates, people that have gone on and done great things that I was able to compete with day in and day out, it was unique. And so again, I don't think I fully appreciated it at the time.
We're talking about freestyle and Greco-Roman success in terms of this being, again, the 50th anniversary of the Junior Nationals, which started in 1971. We don't have a tournament this year. Greco came the next year in 1972, those tournaments starting in Iowa City. But when we look at your high school career, and it ran parallel with the international styles, why were you so drawn to the international styles of freestyle and Greco-Roman?
That's a good question. One, I just enjoyed them a bit more. It seemed to be more action. And I fundamentally believed that if you wanted to do well, you would be training, for the most part year round and getting every opportunity you could. And so when folk style season was over, you jump into, take a week off or whatever and jump into freestyle. I did have, again, Coach Keith Massey, who ran a great program in the summer. And we had camps, and we had, college athletes coming and doing camps. And I would say from a Greco standpoint, I always did enjoy the fact that it was a different way to score on opponents, whether it was in folk style or it was just a different, it taught you things that you could use in folk style. But I also understood that is what was done at the highest levels beyond. At a very young age, I understood that Americans did folk style wrestling. Everybody else does freestyle and Greco. And if I wanted to do something beyond high school and college, which I always envisioned that I would continue wrestling, that is where it would be. And so focus as much time as I can on those styles. And like I said, there was just a different element that once the season was over from a folk style standpoint, then it was almost like, okay, now the fun begins. Now let's go get after it. Let's do some freestyle and Greco. And just had a little bit more of a free type approach or style to it than it felt like more rigid folk style. And that could have been just more of the dynamic that I felt, but that is definitely what I felt.
From a pressure situation, you say that, freestyle and Greco is a lot more fun, a lot more relaxed. But how much pressure is there for being a high school wrestler in the state of Iowa? We've seen the pictures of the old barn, and it's still a tough ticket to get at the Wells Fargo arena right now. And, I guess put it into perspective in terms of what it's like to wrestle high school wrestling in the great state of Iowa.
Again, perspective, it changes with time. Mm-hmm. I would say that I was pretty lucky growing up in that I didn't have a lot of outside pressures that I think sometimes kids feel. While I had a couple older brothers that wrestled, I had a dad that wrestled, and I had coaches that were phenomenal. They were really careful not to put added pressure. They knew that kids that care put pressure on themselves, and you don't need added pressure on yourself. And so from a very young age, I can remember brothers and my dad telling me very clearly, hey, if you don't want to do this sport, don't do it. You got to like it. You got to want to do it. I'm not going to put pressure on you to do it. You do it because you want to do it. And any pressure you feel is just pressure you're putting on yourself, because at the end of the day, this doesn't define you. This isn't what you're about. There's much more than that. So you need to go have fun. And if you want to, do great at wrestling, go train, be the best you can be, but, don't let pressure be a factor. So I think I always had that instilled in me at a very young age that, hey, if I was feeling pressure and nerves, that's okay, but it's something I'm putting on myself. Don't let other people put that on you. Having said all of that, it was a big stage, and there was a lot of, at our school, it was a big sport, and everybody would go to the matches, and people would travel to the state tournament. And I think I just try to use that all from a positive standpoint and embrace it, and just acknowledge it is a big stage, and it's a great opportunity, and I need to be faithful with this opportunity I've been given. So let's go get it. And I got nervous just like anybody else, which is a good thing. And I think I try to use all that in a positive way, and look at it for what it is, and then try to attack it. That's the only way to do it.
We're growing up in an era, you're slightly older than I am, but in that era, there's no Flow, there's no YouTube. Intermat is not even started yet. 1995, Intermat launched, so the internet was not really a thing. How do you and your teammates and Coach Keith Massey, and how does he present the whole, I'm going to use Fargo in air quotes here, but at the time the cadets were in Columbia, Missouri. Fargo hosted the Junior National starting in 1993, but the cadets and juniors were separate. So how do you get talked into going to this national tournament for the cadet age group?
Again, with a couple of older brothers, they had gone to junior nationals and cadet nationals. I think maybe once, both of them went maybe one or two times.
They both did place, by the way, just to give the family a little credit there. Their names are in the archives.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I remember Dan and Doug, but maybe in Greco, both of them maybe. So I had that, they were in front of me, and there were certain things that you just assume that you're going to do if you're going to compete. And that was one of them. And if you were going to compete and you wanted to do well and compete against the best, then you make the team and you go to cadet nationals if you're a cadet, you go to junior nationals if you're junior. And so there wasn't a whole lot of thinking around it. It was more of that's just what you do.
But you went as a first-year cadet to both cadet and junior nationals. Why wrestle up as a freshman?
Well, I went to the state tournament and qualified, and so
simple explanation.
Yeah. So it was, at that point in time, there were kids competing that were in the cadet level, and if they could compete at the junior level, then they would. And so I made the team, and went and competed. And I felt like I didn't know fully at the time. I think I was just learning coming out of my freshman year what I could do at that level. And I started beating some guys that had. I remember, I think I was a freshman at the junior duels, and I beat a couple guys. And later they told me, "Hey, just so you know, he got fourth last year at junior nationals, or this guy won a couple state titles at this." And so that's when I think things started to click that, hey, I'm not that I didn't think this before, but it became a reality of, hey, you can go win some of these huge tournaments. So
Melvin Douglas talks about his recruitment coming out of Kansas, and it's like nobody knew who he was until he went to junior nationals. How much in that era was the recruitability factor of going to cadet and junior nationals? Like, these college coaches are going to see here. How much was that kind of told to you guys to know that if you perform here, you've got opportunities to compete at the next level?
It was known. I think it was, I don't remember it being a factor of, hey, if you go and do this, then you'll be able to go compete in college. But it was just known that, to your point, there wasn't a lot of you had to go to the big tournaments because that's where coaches would see people. And that's where you get noticed. And so I think it was known. But for me, I don't think it was necessarily a driving factor. Again, I really tried to think more of, if I want to be the best, there's a certain number of things that I can do. And there's some practical things you can do. It's training hard, competing against the best, and winning. And those other things, they kind of take care of themselves. So while I knew there was some recruiting going on, I think I intentionally try not to let those outside factors play a role, because that's just more pressure.
Getting into the nitty gritty now, the competition, because you went 4 years, 93, 94, 95, and 96. As far as I'm looking at the age we're going year. So were you an 8th grade cadet or not?
No, I was actually young. So I was a May birthday. So I was a freshman. So I just turned 18 as I was graduating. So I was a young freshman. So I was a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Okay,
gotcha. Just looking at the timeline here. So 93 cadets, which is now called 16U. I'm just going to use cadets because it's easier for us to say in that era. Make the finals both styles. You wrestled the same guy in the finals in both styles, and you win one, you lose the other. Explain what it's like your first experience wrestling for the big stop sign against a guy from your home state.
Yeah, I was going to say, Will Kelly. Man, I should have gone back and brushed up a little bit.
Don't worry, I got you.
Will was a competitor, and he was great, especially in freestyle and Greco. So I had trained with him. I'd wrestled against him. I think he'd actually beat me at the state tournament that year as well, high school state tournament. And so I'd known him and seen him compete a lot. And I knew that there was a chance that we'd be competing against each other. But at that point, it's just, as you'd expect, it's another competitor, and you go out and you try to beat him. But it was great to have two Iowa guys in there. I mean, we loved that showing, because I think at that point in time we were trying to build a Greco program and trying to make a name for ourselves. So to get a couple of Iowa guys in there was great.
Next year is one that just kind of is eye-opening, again, because you're separate in separate locations. You can wrestle cadets and juniors. You won 3 titles in the same year. But before we get to those 3 titles, you won junior Greco, you won cadets in freestyle and Greco. Junior freestyle, though, what happened there? I didn't place that year, right? That was the year that's the only tournament, the national tournament I didn't place. I think I remember Floyd Lauren beat me. I forget who the first match was I lost, although you probably have it there. But it was funny. Brackets don't exist right now, so I'm asking you out of genuine curiosity.
Yeah. I got beat. I forget the. I have to go back and look. But I remember Floyd Lauren, who was from Oklahoma, who was super tough. Actually went and wrestled at Oklahoma and had some health issues, who would have been great. He was the guy that beat me, and I lost one other match, and I don't recall who it was, but it may have been Clint Musser. There's a couple pretty tough kids I recall. At that level, if you depending on how the bracket lays out, if you get a couple of tougher kids earlier on, But I think I went like 6 or 7 matches. I think I was a match away from placing and got taken out by a couple tough kids. But yeah, that's how it goes.
The old vertical pairing system, I mean, it's like you could. I mean, I make. I don't want to say I make fun, but Brett Haas coaches out in Dubuque, and he gets brought up every single year because in 2012 in Junior Greco, he wrestled Kyle Snyder and Jaden Cox back to back.
Yeah,
thanks for coming out. I mean, that story gets. I mean, the quality of that draw gets. Grows year and year, but that was what the vertical pairing system would do. So you win 7-8 matches and not place. That's how tough the tournament was. Now, is some of that maybe was possibly fatigue? Because I'm going to assume that freestyle was after Greco, and this would have been your 4th national tournament of the summer.
I don't think it was, and the reason I say that is I remember the Saturday of wrestling in freestyle, where you're getting down to the nitty gritty and you have a ton of mats out. And so you're wrestling some matches pretty close to each other. There's no warm up time or cool down time because you just wrestle and within 30, 40 minutes, you're going again. And, I love that part. I remember just enjoying that because at that point, I don't know if I had trained well enough where it wasn't fatiguing or if it was, just the fact that there was no more warming up, you're already warm, and I really it's almost like a practice, and I like practice. And so you just walk back out and have another match, and then you go off and, you cool off for a minute and go back out. So I don't think I would chalk it up to that. Like I said, I think they're just a couple tough wrestlers.
We see a lot, and I guess I've seen this a lot in the last 22 years going to the tournament, the kids that have that success in both styles at the cadet age group, when it's time for them to move up to juniors, they'll usually, the ones that have those higher level college aspirations will typically say, all right, I'm just going to concentrate on freestyle. I don't want to get beat up through Greco and have to go 8-9 matches and then wrestle freestyle with guys who are coming in fresh. You didn't do that. You wrestled both styles in the both years you went as a junior. Why decide to stick with both styles?
It's a good question. I don't think it was as prevalent as far as picking a style, although it definitely did happen. And you would see guys that would really consider, hey, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to get tired. And before I jump into the other,
look at you just showing up for freestyle, tough guy.
But I fundamentally, it's very basics. I really enjoyed Greco. I liked doing it. I had again some really good coaches, and I had success at it. And so I enjoyed it, and I viewed it as another opportunity to go out and wrestle some great competition. And I didn't know where the future would go as it relates to what I would do down the road. But I enjoyed it, and there was never really a consideration of not doing it. It was just it was something I enjoyed and I liked, and you never know. You can make all sorts of plans and think that they're going to work out a certain way, but who knows? Who knows if you would do better or worse if you were focusing on one or the other, and that's how I viewed it.
Was the chase of the titles any concern for you? How many titles you could win, or was it just go out there and just compete?
Yeah, again, with perspective, I could see that being something that potentially could have played a role, but I just don't remember it being that way. I remember it being, I'm going to do whatever it takes to put myself in the best position to win and then go execute. And I just try to keep it really, really simple, because I do think when you let those other, again, it comes to pressure, college coaches competing for titles, your parents putting pressure, all those things. I just, luckily, I had enough coaching and people telling me, hey, don't worry about those things. All that stuff, it takes care of itself. You put yourself in the best position to win and go compete. And that's all you can do.
A lot of your career, people focus on that one year, and you probably know which one we're talking about, where you beat Cael Sanderson in the junior finals and a guy named Joe Heskett was third. Explain that bracket and what you knew about these opponents. Again, in an era where the internet is just starting to get in there, Cael's out from Utah. Heskett's from Ohio at one of the powerhouses at Walsh Jesuit. So what did you know about the competition in the field? And obviously that bracket's lore has grown over the years, but what do you remember about your competition that year going in?
I think TJ Williams was in that bracket too, if I remember right.
Jeez. Rick Springman was in there, and Nathan Coy, a couple guys that had some pretty good success too.
So I remember that there were some tough wrestlers in there. And remember at the time, so Cael Sanderson is who he is today because of all the stuff that he did. At that point in time, he was absolutely, tough as nails, but he hadn't, gone and done what he's done today. So I knew his stuff actually, and I knew, of course, the older brothers that came through as well. And I knew, there were a handful of really tough guys. I think I wasn't one, because at that point in time, you actually could go and study different wrestlers and learn all about them at some level. I wasn't one that did that. I knew of them mostly because I'd seen them at other tournaments. I'd heard about them, but I wasn't one that would go study all the different wrestlers and try to know as much as I could about them. And so I knew about as much as what most people would know that knew those wrestlers, but not much more. And I just knew that they were tough. They'd won tournaments, and I may have seen them wrestle throughout the tournament here and there. But again, I didn't focus on that too much.
Stylistically, where were your strengths in freestyle?
I probably scored 80% of my points off of front headlocks and gut wrenches. And I felt like I could gut wrench anybody, although Cael did step over and put me in a bad position in the finals. And I felt like I could gut wrench anybody. Nobody could turn me, and I could get pretty much anybody in a front headlock and score. And I had offensively, I probably was mostly focused on mostly high crotches, but I pulled people down in front headlocks quite a bit, and so. I think if you have those things, if you can score on anybody and you cannot get scored on when you're on bottom, you got to put yourself in a good position.
Back then, 1-point takedowns, did that kind of, strategically go, okay, why exude all my energy with a 1-pointer when I can get a chest lock tilt or something like that? I mean, obviously coming out of Council Bluffs, there's a couple of twins that are really good at the chest locks. They're named the Paulsons. So I'm guessing that the styles change. I mean, how good were you on your feet comparatively from going for the 2-pointers in high school to the 1-pointers in freestyle and Greco?
Yeah. Well, what I always thought was if I could get a takedown, then I could get 2 more. So I viewed it as a takedown could be worth 3. So I don't think that I didn't do a ton of turns off of, crotch lifts and various other defensive turns, with the exception of front headlock. But I felt like it was easier for me to get guys by faking and pulling them down in front headlock and scoring. It was easier for me to do that than it was for me to attack somebody's legs. And I would pull on their head enough and kind of push on them and wear them down. And after doing that enough is when it opened up the shots for me. So a lot of times my focus was pull on them, push on them, pull on them, see if you can get them out in front headlock. As they start to get a little bit slower and they start pulling up a little bit with their head, that's when the shots open up. That was usually my approach.
When everything's done, you end up with 11 medals and 8 titles. Nobody's ever done that. Do you remember what you were thinking first of all, did anybody ever throw that stat at you and be like, hey, you're the only one to ever do this?
No, it was never even. I think I knew at juniors that at that time, I think I had the most or was tied for the most. So at that time, that was known. And but I don't think saying it that way, I don't know if anybody has ever said it that way. I think I've seen it written a couple times. But it was just, I knew that it was a lot, and I knew that I'd done something that was unique, but I don't think it was really stated that way.
Yeah, just so for historical stakes, Sean Haig won 8 titles at both age groups. You were the only other person to do that. Sean Haig and Brent Metcalf have 6 junior titles in both styles. Most medals, that group is 3. It's you, it's Brandon Paulson, and it's Cody Sanderson. You're the only 3 wrestlers to ever place in both styles a combined 11 times. So it is definitely an exclusive group. The most people do now is 10 because you don't really get a whole lot of it. It's a lot harder to be in the same venue and wrestle both styles concurrently. It has happened, but it's very rare. You'd see it at maybe like a junior 98 and a cadet 100, whatever it may be, or the age groups at the time. But once that's all said and done and it's time to go to college, you get two older brothers that went to Northern Iowa. I did not subscribe to wrestling magazines at the time, but I've got to assume you were probably ranked 1 or 2 in the country, probably across the board. What went into the decision to choose Oklahoma?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I visited a number of schools, and I really went in eyes wide open. Coming out of Iowa, of course, you have Iowa and Iowa State and Northern Iowa, all of which were doing well. Iowa was in a great spot. At some level, just in full transparency, my brothers in Northern Iowa, they competed against those Iowa guys and the Iowa State guys. And so, while it didn't hold me back from considering the schools, I think, I didn't grow up, running around with Iowa gear on because it was Northern Iowa gear. And so I strongly considered Northern Iowa. I went to Nebraska and looked. I went to Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, went to Arizona State, and I really had an open mind to all of it. Coach Mark Manning was the assistant coach at Oklahoma at the time. I got to know him pretty well, and we went on a trip with him overseas, and met the guys. I knew there was a good incoming class, and so at the end of the day, I felt like that was a program that had a great history, had support from the school, and was on its way up. It had been really, really tough, had some downtime, and then was on its way back up. And all those factors together, between the coaching, the teams, the coaching staff, the team that was coming in play. Jack Spates was the head coach, who I got to know really well over the course of the recruiting period. And so it's kind of all the factors: the school, the team, the coaches. I felt like the trajectory of the team, where it was going, and sometimes there's a bit of a gut feel of you sit back, you think about it, you pray about it, you really try to figure out where you have peace, and you go with it.
Explain what it's like to be a high-level recruit in that era. Now we've got social media. You got direct messages, text messages, FaceTime. How do coaches reach out and get a hold of you? I mean, it's got to be a home phone, clearly.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny to think about that now. But, yeah, they would call the house phone, and my mom or dad would answer, and they would talk to them. And, this is Coach so-and-so, Coach Jack Spates from Oklahoma. Is David around? And they'd say, all right, here he is. And so I think there were a couple times when I'm trying to think of how we communicate, if we set those up or if they just grabbed the time and hoped that I was there that evening. But I'm sure, it's very different now. I'm sure there's all sorts of texting and connections. And, but you just make the time and you have the conversations. And I took it, I decided late because I took it seriously, and I wanted to make the right decision and didn't want to rush into it. I was playing football in the fall, and that was going to be tough to go on recruiting trips. So went through the process, had the conversations, and wanted to make a good decision.
You just said something there, playing football in the fall. How important was it for you to be not just wrestling 100% of the time, to be a multi-sport athlete?
It was good. Again, at the time, I had a couple people ask me at times, hey, are you going to step away and start focusing? Again, I think it was more prevalent then than it is now to keep doing both sports or multiple sports. But I also really enjoyed it. And there was some element of playing football that, I had trained all summer and worked hard. And then it was my season in the fall to do another sport. At that point in time, those were the only 2 sports I was doing. I wasn't playing soccer anymore. I wasn't doing anything else. And so it was important to me. We had a pretty solid team. I really enjoyed it. And it was the kind of the period before the season started where I was very active in, competing and training in another way. I think at some level kind of keeps you fresh, and you come back and hit it hard again. So I enjoyed it. I liked it, and I never really considered not doing it.
You get to Oklahoma, you end up being a 2-time national qualifier there, but the story that follows you around when you get to college is what happened. Injuries have pretty much been, kind of what you've been labeled as, oh man, he got hurt. What a career it could have been. When did the first injury occur? What was it and what happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd had a couple minor knee injuries, and in high school, and I think even my redshirt year. I took a redshirt year, and everything. I was pretty healthy pretty much the whole redshirt year, but I did have a couple small scopes. And the first injury, so I guess I wrestled. The first match I lost was against Oklahoma State, Steven Schmidt, and he was ranked number one, returning number one ranked guy, a couple of all-time All-American. And we had a battle, this OU-OSU duel, and that was the last match I would say I felt like I wrestled healthy. And he, at least for a couple of years, I did get healthy there for a period later. He, in the last 20 seconds, he ends up beating me. And I think it was a day or two later, I was in training and wrestling in a kind of separate, it wasn't during a practice, it was just a separate training session. And I did something to my MCL, the inside of my knee, and had to take, the bulk of the year off. And then I tried to come back at the back end of the year and came back for Big 12s, but ended up getting beat by a couple guys I'd beaten previously. And so just never really got back to where I needed to get to. What's interesting though is all the same knee, but then I had just continuing forward. I had a number of other things that ended up hurting my LCL. The biggest thing was I basically got down to no cartilage. And so they had to do a whole bunch of things to try to lessen the impact in the joint. And at the end of the day, I have cadaverous meniscus in there. They had to try to straighten my gait so that I wouldn't put as much pressure on certain parts of my bone. But after a number of I think I had 8 or 9 surgeries, I just never really got back to where I could compete consistently. And that's kind of glossing over a lot of it, but there was just a handful of different surgeries throughout that period of time.
How much of it affected, maybe, I guess, I mean, people talk about mental health now, but back in the day, again, no internet, a lot of, fewer opportunities to really kind of situate. How much did that affect you mentally in terms of, lack of a better term, outsiders will look at it as a letdown? You've got all these titles from Fargo and high school, and you've got no medals at the NCAA level. I mean, how did you cope with that?
Yeah, well, no, it's devastating. I mean, the reality is at the time, that becomes your, and from where I sat, where I believed, that's what I focused on. So it's not an easy thing to do. I remember being devastated when I didn't go to the NCAA tournament as a freshman, just after being hurt. As a sophomore, pretty much hurt the bulk of the year, and came in my junior year feeling good finally. And really, it wasn't until midway or back into the year where I felt like I'd kind of grown into the new weight class. I was feeling healthy, and then got hurt again before Big 12s. And I would just say, coming out of that, I wondered, even though I did compete and go to nationals, it was on effectively, just wasn't close to 100%. I remember wondering, hey, is this the last time I'll wrestle? Not because I didn't want to, but I just felt like my knee was done, and it was. And I just remember thinking, I don't think I had a belief system like I do today, but I do remember thinking, at the end of the day, this is all going to go away. And wrestling is a huge part of people's lives, and it's a huge part of my life, but there's much bigger and better things down the road outside of wrestling. And wrestling, what it does is it shapes you and gives you the opportunity to do things you otherwise wouldn't be able to do in life. And so I did have some of that perspective. And so I don't think I ever went to a bad place mentally where I was, really dark place. I think looking back though, what I did do is I just fundamentally was like, gosh, I trained my whole life for this. And I always knew that everybody's one injury away. Everybody's one instance away, one whatever it is away. And so that was always drilled into me. And so luckily, that did prevail. And I have stuck around and helped coach for a couple of years, did whatever I could, try to get a 6-year of eligibility, had another surgery, still couldn't compete. So I did all I could. And if you can walk away from any situation and know that I did all that I could, all that was in my ability and power, and we can always do that small things differently. But if you give it all that you got, at the end of the day, you get hurt, or even if you don't win and do what you wanted to do, that's all anybody can ask. And so I think I fundamentally relied on that. And, I would have loved to win some titles and get some medals. And looking back at the team we had, we were third and fourth place. And I mean, what weighs over me is if I'd have been, top couple in the country, which I expected to be, that team title would have been within reach. We would have had a team that was competing for the title. And so, or close to it, right? Depending on how well I did. So I think from a mental standpoint, I think I was fine, but it definitely hurt. I mean, it hurt bad. Right? You do all you can do your whole life, and then you just can't compete the level you want to. But there's other things.
Looking at the last thing about your college career, we look at the year you're the 4th seed at nationals, but you default to Brian Snyder. Is that, again, without the brackets and without actually watching it, was that a default prior to, or did you default in the match, or was that to save the knee going into nationals?
The finals of Big 12s?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd hurt my knee pretty bad a week before, and maybe 2 weeks before, and that was the big letdown because I finally felt like things were clicking.
Yeah, you're the 4th seed, so you clearly had a good season up to that point.
Yeah. I wanted to get to the finals and forfeit because I needed to spend the least amount of time on my knee as possible, and I was in a decent amount of pain, and so that was a decision that was made.
So we flash forward. The college accolades don't come, but in your career, a move down to Texas has kind of changed things. Again, we had alluded to the beginning. The last time I'd actually run into you was down in Texas at the NWC All-Star Classic. I want to say 2006. And you're there with Brandon Slay. And Brandon, after he wins an Olympic gold, comes down. He's back in his home state of Texas. And you guys cross paths. And it becomes a friendship and a bond that's lifelong now. Explain the first time you ran into Brandon Slay down in Texas.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So he had kind of got out of the wrestling world for a little while from training and coaching and competing, and come to find out he had moved about a block away from here, less than a block away, got into commercial real estate, and I think at that point in time he was either joining a church or about to join a church, and sure enough, when I started talking to him, we realized, we're both in commercial real estate. We work basically across the street from each other. We live across the street from each other, and we're going to the same church. And so we end up just, said, well, this seems to make a lot of sense. So we started hanging out and ended up being roommates and lifelong friends now, good buddy of mine. And so it's kind of funny how those things, wrestling's a small world anyway, but you add all those other factors. And then Ty Wilcox, I remember Ty Wilcox at Oklahoma State, Ed Mosley, who was an All-American at Harvard. We all ended up, living in Dallas and started a little kids wrestling club. And so it was kind of funny how all that came together.
And I think you might be underselling the kids club. Talk about the Dallas Dynamite a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we had, we started this club, and, because of all the various connections we had, we got a club up and running, and in Dallas, there were definitely some strong clubs, but we wanted to make it unaffiliated with the school and make it for anybody that wanted to be a part of a program. And so we set up a nonprofit. We raised some money, and over the years, looking back, we had Jamel Kelly coached it for a little while. You had Kendall Cross was involved for a little while. Melvin Lofton, who now ended up running it for a period of time, and now basically he now has his own program with it, as we all stepped away and started having families and moved on to other things. But no, it was fun. We had a lot of fun, and the club had a lot of success and had a lot of good wrestlers come through.
That's also in an era where there was still kind of, maybe not 100% taboo, but to charge for a wrestling club. Private training was something that was still very, very new to wrestling. What was the response in Texas for something like that?
Well, the interesting thing, what we did is we basically, we weren't trying to make any money on it. We all had separate other jobs. We wanted to try to just keep the doors open. And so we raised money, and we did that, and people understood that. At the same time, we told anybody that if money is an issue, let us know. We'll figure out a way. And so we like to say, some kids may not have ever come because they said that because they felt like they couldn't pay. But for any kid that showed up and said, I want to do it and I can't afford it, we found a way. And there were a number of them. We had some donors that said no kid should go, without being able to wrestle who wants to wrestle. And so whether it was between us, just on our side covering it, and or donors, any kid could wrestle that wanted to. So I think there was some initial pushback, but I think ultimately pushback and just in the, just things that we heard. But at the end of the day, it was, I think people embraced it. And when you compare it to any of the other sports, it was still a bargain.
Texas kind of has this stigma. Oh, well, they didn't have wrestling for so long. Well, high school wrestling's been in Texas for a long, long time. It's just the state association didn't sanction it until I want to say last 20, 25 years or so. What did you learn about Texas wrestling that really kind of changed your perspective on, okay, we're going to have to coach these kids a little differently than the way I was coached in Iowa?
No, it's good. So I call it a first generation sport, and you had very few parents that had been around wrestling. And so as much as anything, we were trying to educate parents about the sport because they hadn't been around it. They didn't fully appreciate or understand some components of it, what the weekend tournaments were like. And so you had to kind of change the mindset, whereas, you have kids in Iowa Iowa or Pennsylvania or other states whose grandparents, were wrestlers. And so, so there is that element of, hey, this is going to be a little bit different. And then we need to make sure parents fully understand, appreciate, we bring them in, let them know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And as much as anything, and, now I have a separate, I help out at a high school where we've got a little program going there. And I want the parents just to have exposure and know it's an option for them. Because again, a lot of these parents just haven't been around it. And having said all that, there are, as you'll see, like a Jack Mueller who came out of the Dallas area, and there's a whole bunch that have come out that have done a really good job. They all, so there's great individuals, but you just don't have a lot of times the depth where you have every kid doing it just like they would do soccer or baseball. And then at the end of the day, the ones that really excel stick around and do it. It's more of just getting those numbers out. And so if you get the numbers out and, if 10% of them latch onto it, then great. And so that's what I'm really focused on, and making it fun, getting the parents educated, and getting them, getting a certain percentage to stick to it. That's the goal.
A lot of people just say with the population and the prevalence of high school football and just the talented athletes that gravitate to contact sports in Texas, it's like they say wrestling's a sleeping giant in Texas. What do we got to do to wake that giant up?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of states though that have a big population. I do think it's growing. I think it's getting better, and I think just like anything, it takes time. But I think when you see success from certain individuals that are out of Texas, then you'll start to, like Bo Nickel, for instance, right, coming out of Dallas. So you have these stud wrestlers, and I think that has a huge impact on it. And so the more and more you get these kids competing at a higher level, the more you're going to see it grow.
A lot of the impetus behind this particular episode is to kind of showcase some of the history of the sport. And we're in an era that the kids that are wrestling now or would have been eligible for Fargo weren't born when you won your last title out there. So getting the kids to understand the heroes of the sport. I mean, Brandon's from Texas, so that's a natural gravitation for people that are growing up wrestling in Texas, knowing that, hey, Brandon Slade was an Olympic champion. Hey, Randy Miller was an Olympic bronze medalist. Like Tamira Mensah Stock is a world champion. Those are Texas wrestlers. So how do you go about, whether it be with the little clubs you got or just running into wrestlers on a day-to-day basis, kind of highlight those champions that these kids in the state of Texas can look up to and aspire to be like?
Yeah. Well, early on with Dallas Dynamite, I think we would try to point that out, and some of which, when Brandon was there, I think it was very obvious. But I think that just simply pointing out to them that there is success at the highest level, but you need to go challenge yourself. You need to get outside the state. You need to go to these other tournaments. Obviously, we're a couple hours from the Oklahoma border, where you're going to have a different group of kids to wrestle with. And so just encouraging to do that. We've done that from day one. A lot of kids from Texas would not go outside the state. We got a charter bus. We went to New Orleans to a tournament. We took some kids to Oklahoma. So we were just trying to get out, and that's continued on. And right now I'm working with the very, very young kids. And for them right now, it doesn't mean anything to them anyway. So really what I'm trying to do is just expose them, make sure they're having fun, teach them fundamentals, teach them, let them have fun, and then get the parents to understand what the sport's about.
We get into the day-to-day life in your business world. How much, wrestling plays a huge role in people's lives, but how much did the sport of wrestling, not with its accomplishments, but with what it teaches you, help you today in what you're doing day-to-day in business and with your family?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's funny. I had this conversation with my son last night, literally. It was more broadly just about sports. But what kids don't understand, and I hope that parents can really buy into this, that at the end of the day, getting a kid to be really good at a sport is fine, but that's not the end goal. You want a kid to work hard and train hard so they can learn what it's like in the real world, outside of sport, after sport, and what sports can teach you about what it means to be a good teammate at work, a good coworker, to be a good husband, to lead a family, to lead a business. And if it's really about how well you compete, that's great. That is good, but that's not the end goal. And so we had this conversation about there's things that are hard in life. And if you have been able to grit through physically and mentally day in and day out a wrestling practice, you're going to put yourself in a really good position to be able to get through the things that life will throw at you. Doesn't mean life's easy. And in some ways, life is very complicated, and all the different elements that come with it, where sometimes in wrestling you can be very focused and single-minded and drive through something. But at the end of the day, these life lessons of just being able to tough through it and handle tough situations. Being nervous is okay, because if you're nervous for a wrestling match, that's great. Just like when you go present to 20 board members, then you're going to get nervous, but that's okay too. You game up for it. And so there's a lot of carryover.
How much do you think your life would be different if you'd have gone to Columbia, Fargo, Warrensburg, St. Paul, wherever it may have been, and you came away with 0 titles instead of 8?
I don't know if I ever think through it like that. I think I don't know. I fundamentally believe that there was a path and plan that laid out the way it was supposed to lay out. And if I wouldn't have gone to Oklahoma as a result of not going and winning titles, and I would have done something else, then that I would have, in that position, in the situations that I was in, hopefully I would have made the decisions that I needed to make in those moments. And I don't know if I gave it a whole lot of consideration just because it wasn't the path that it went down. But it is interesting to think about, when you make decisions to go compete, and if you do well, you're going to have opportunities that present themselves. And if you don't, then you might not. So
throughout the path of this discussion, you've alluded to church and faith and whatnot. And how much of that really has kind of shaped things post-college for you?
It's been a huge part. I did grow up and went to church and things growing up. I don't think I fully appreciated what it meant to be a believer and trust that Christ died for me, and that's where my foundation is. I didn't understand and appreciate that until after college, and but I do see how all these things that happened, whether it was going to Oklahoma and then having injuries and not going down a path, and then ultimately ending up in Dallas, where I get connected with people in a church where I really come to understand, which is in my opinion, the most important thing, which is why are we here? What are we doing here? And what does all this mean? And really having a trusting faith that Christ died for us. And at the end of the day, if we believe in that, then we'll have eternal life. And that makes everything else pale in comparison. And so I think when I look back and see how all this was either orchestrated or happened, and I end up where I am, I can't be anything but thankful, because as you said, if things would have worked out a different way, who knows where I would be and what I would be doing. And I wouldn't trade what I have, or fundamentally what I believe in the way in which I got here for anything. So, not that there aren't mistakes to make along the way, but I do believe I've ended up in a pretty good spot.
Spinning it back to wrestling just for a moment, where do you think your biggest impact on the sport of wrestling exists?
It's a good question. Well, hopefully there'll still be some opportunities down the road with coaching some kids, because I do think I may have had some impact on. I do hear from time to time I'll come across somebody that will say, "Hey, I watched you, or I heard you say X, Y, and Z, and it impacted me." So I do hear that periodically, just randomly. But hopefully down the road there'll be a chance for me as I try to continue to be. I do think we all have a responsibility to continue on and teach and train the next group. And so my hope is the biggest impact will be these little kids that we get to touch and spend time with through coaching. That somehow that impacts them, and not just from a wrestling perspective, but from a life perspective. So the answer is I hope not. I hope that I don't know that answer yet, because it's going to come down the road.
Well, coming down the road, you can hear the footsteps running up and down. As the interview there at your house, you got young kids, and you're getting your kids into wrestling. And having been such a successful athlete at the age group levels, and then you look around, you can probably understand that there's the crazy youth sports parents out there. How much of your philosophy on getting your kids into the sport of wrestling is based around your upbringing, and is based around how not to do things in your upbringing?
Yeah. Well, it's good. I think I'll allude back to when I was the comment I made about when I was a kid. The lucky thing is I did have brothers and a dad that wrestled, and they were the first ones to just be clear to me that not to put pressure on myself, to enjoy it. And so I didn't have the crazy coach dad. I had quite the opposite. He was very laid back. He, win or lose, I just knew the way that he treated me or cared for me made no difference if I won or lost. And so that just took all sorts of pressure off. So I had a good example. And so now teaching kids, I do follow a lot of that example. I'm probably a little more verbal, and try to instill very early on, hey, this is what wrestling does for you. It creates character. It makes you tough. It allows you to be brave. It allows you to overcome fears. And so I think those are some of the things that at a very young age, I try to teach all the kids that we get to spend time with. But as they get older, I know my philosophy will be very similar to what I think I was taught with, which is, you have to have the physical ability to do something. You have to know the technique, and you have to have the want to. If you can have those three elements, you're gonna do great. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to put pressure on yourself, or you don't want to do it, or you're doing it for somebody else, it's not gonna work. It's got to be something you got to want to do. So I think those are a lot of the same philosophies that I'll instill. Again, I'm in a different phase right now with young. My oldest is 7, and so he's just trying to get a little bit involved, and I'm trying to just keep it fun for him.
You mean he hasn't won seven national youth titles yet?
No, he's 7, 5, and 3, so 2 boys and a girl, and she might be the toughest one, really. But but yeah, so that's very simply how I look at it.
You spoke earlier that you were aware we're just one injury away. We're just one moment away from having your career you basically disappear. With all the accolades that you've got, and then your success in business. How important is it for everybody in the sport of wrestling to know that wrestling doesn't define a wrestler in their life?
Yeah, well, it's really it should be a fundamental point people understand, because then you will your whole being is caught up in a match and in a wrestling, and that can put you in a pretty bad spot, because nobody wrestles forever, and
Baumgartner tried.
That's true. It's funny. It's this balance where if you have freedom, if you have true freedom, where you can know that it doesn't matter if I win or lose, because at the end of the day, I'm not defined by it. I fundamentally believe that you're going to be a better wrestler because you don't have the pressure of my life is defined by winning or losing. And I think you can do that. And it's hard to do. Some people did it. I think Brandon, to mention Brandon, I think he did it. I think Kyle Snyder does it. There's some wrestlers that can just understand I'm not defined by winning or losing or by wrestling. I'm defined by a number of other things. Fundamentally, what do I believe? What's my faith? What do I believe? It's, I have a family that loves and cares for me regardless of what happens. And is when people can fully appreciate and understand that, I think it allows them to be free. And then when you're free, you don't wrestle scared. And when you don't wrestle scared, then you're able to beat people you probably shouldn't beat. I don't know how to fully instill that in people without just telling them and just letting them experience it and seeing it. But you just people have to fundamentally believe that. Otherwise, at the end of the day, when wrestling's over, there's the life to live. And if you were defined by that and that's gone, it makes it pretty tough to move on.
Is that pretty much how you've kind of avoided the maybe understandable bitterness that you could have about your own career?
Yeah. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there's times especially when it's pretty close to being done with school, when you look back and say, gosh, if I just could have, or this. But I think so. And I'm not one, by the way, that just looks back. It's just not my personality. I don't look back and really think about or just let my mind be in a place where I think through those things. One, there's a whole life for us to live now, and there's all sorts of things. You got a bunch of work to do. I have a family that I care for and love, and there's things to do there. So I'm not one that I think more about the future and what we're going to do, and very little about the past. It's good to talk about it and reminisce about it and think about how I can learn and what we can teach others. But there isn't much benefit from just spending time in mental space, or it doesn't result in good outcomes.
Spinning it to your high school career again and Fargo, and because you did finish your career in Fargo, so the air quotes goes away. 8 titles, 11 medals. Nobody's ever done it. What do you say to somebody that says that David Kjeldgaard's the greatest high school wrestler of all time?
Well, I don't know if anybody's ever said that, but there are a lot of really, really good high school wrestlers. If you've ever seen Kerry Colat's high school films, it's pretty unbelievable. But I would say thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate you saying that. There's some great wrestlers out there. It sounds like a personal opinion. But man, I enjoyed my time. I think I learned a ton from it. And, if people got something out of it, that's great.
Having gone through all these tournaments and myself as a PA announcer, your name has probably been butchered hundreds and hundreds of times. What's the best mispronunciation of your name you've ever heard?
Well, when people try to say every letter that's in my name, that's when it gets pretty funny, because there's a K and a J, and there's a D and a G, and there's a couple of A's in there. And so when people say, a lot of times they'll put the K silent, but it's funniest when it's Kjeldgaard. And it gets this quite often. So
yeah, which stan are you from?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, Kjeldgaard, in case you're wondering. Now, finally, I did talk with Brandon Slay a little bit prior to this to kind of get an introspective. He's one of your best friends, and you're the best man in his wedding, and opportunity to give Brandon a little bit of a ribbing here. What's one of your funniest Brandon Slay stories that you can actually probably tell here, that he wouldn't really come across the country and come hit you with that beautiful double leg that he's got? Or maybe he does. I might pay to see that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you should have given me a heads up on this one.
Oh, that's what makes it organic. I'm not going to give you all that in the email. Come on, brother.
Funniest story. Well, this is just something that
I just want to know, first of all, real quick, how long has his hair stayed in that gelled stage? Because I think he wakes up and it's already popped up.
That's true. It's just always that way. Although there's a season there where he kind of had it changed, but I think he went back. He went back to old school.
Like, who's the guy with the comb over? Oh, wait, it's just not standing up.
And this is just something that's just cracks me up. He fundamentally just doesn't understand how, even post-training, how he just is strong and just awkwardly strong. And we would joke around because we would say he just slayed that. And what would happen is he'd go to open up a bag of chips and he would just rip it open and chips would fly everywhere. And so we give him a hard time and say, hey, look, can you help me with this, but don't slay it. Right? And so it's just an ongoing joke that anything he touched, he'd slay. And, or if he would come up and, show a gut wrench on somebody, he just didn't know that he was breaking ribs. And the last one I'll mention, going back to going to the same church, this is a pretty funny story. There was a guy, a group of us that were from the same church. We're at this event, a bunch of different folks from our church. And, there's a guy that kind of kept messing with him and saying, I'm going to take down the Olympic champion. I'm going to take him out. And Brandon kept saying like, hey, I'm going to take you out here pretty soon. He kind of kept on. This guy kept on, and his name's Corey. And I was like, hey, Corey, at some point he's going to hit you with a double leg. And the guy kept doing it, and Brandon's going to kill me for telling the story. So finally Brandon hit him with a double leg. Didn't do it hard, but did hit him with a double leg. Took him down. The guy landed on his side and got up, and it was fine. And then a little bit later we hear that the guy walked around for a while, but then took a knee and was like down, and they're taking him to the hospital. And Brandon, long story short, the guy ended up, I think he punctured a lung, and they took him to the hospital, and all his buddies showed up with a bunch of WWF dolls. The guy was great, and it was a total freak accident. Brandon really didn't do anything that bad. He just landed awkward, and we're all good buddies now. But we used to joke around. We're like, yeah, Brandon was hanging out with his church buddies and put a guy in the hospital. So be careful around Brandon.
Yeah, he slayed that guy at a 10% speed double leg.
Exactly.
It kind of makes you respect the durability of a Satiev who had that thing full blast. I mean, he survived.
He made it.
Anyway, David, it's been great to catch up and hear a little bit about your story and things of that nature. Of course, 50th anniversary. We got no wrestling to talk about, but we're still talking about wrestling, and any words of wisdom, I guess, out there that you've got for the young kids coming through that are maybe discovering your story for the first time and see all the accolades and be like, wait a minute, I guess any words of advice, tips, tricks, or tools of the trade, so to speak.
Yeah. A couple things. I try to break it down very simply. And I mentioned before, you can't have your whole life defined by wrestling, and we spent plenty of time on that. But I think secondly is I just always think of being faithful with what you've been given. And so God's given us various abilities and talents and people around us. Be faithful with that. You don't get it back. So go train hard, work hard, put yourself in the best position to win. And when I say be faithful, that doesn't mean be anything but tough as nails, work hard, and do all you can with what you've been given. And that the rest takes care of itself.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Sportswear. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. Hey, you know what? Did you like the show? You want to hit that subscribe button? MatTalkOnline.com/listen. Various different ways to subscribe to this show on your favorite podcatcher of choice. And if you're already subscribed and you already listen and you love the show and you want to support this show and this network, MatTalkOnline.com/join the team. Become a team member today.